the Lord is with you.
And also with you.
Thank you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Luke.
Glory to you, Lord.
That same day, 2 of the disciples were making their way to the village called Emmaus, which was about 7 miles from Jerusalem, discussing all that had happened as they went. While they were discussing these things, Jesus approached and began to walk along with them, though they were kept from recognizing Jesus, who asked them, "What are you two discussing as you go on your way?" They stood and looked sad. One of them, Cleopas by name, asked him, "Are you the only one in Jerusalem who does not know the things that have happened these past few days?" Jesus said to him, "What things?" They said, "About Jesus of Nazareth, a prophet, powerful in word and in deed in the eyes of God and all the people, how our chief priests and leaders delivered him up to be condemned to death and crucified him. We were hoping that he was the one who would set Israel free. Besides all this, today, the 3rd day since these things happened, some women in our group just brought us some astonishing news. They were at the tomb before dawn and did not find the body. And they returned and informed us that they had seen a vision of angels who had declared that Jesus was alive. Some of our number went to the tomb and found it to be just as the women said, but they did not find Jesus." Then Jesus said to them, "What little sense you have, how slow you are to believe all that the prophets have announced. Did not the Messiah have to undergo all these things to enter into glory?" Then, beginning with Moses and all the prophets, Jesus interpreted for them every single passage of Scripture that referred to the Messiah. By now they were nearing a village and they were going to go, and Jesus appeared to be going further. But they said to him, "Stay with us, for it is nearly evening and the day is practically over." So Jesus went and stayed with them. After sitting down to eat with them, Jesus took bread and said the blessing, broke the bread to distribute it to them, and with that their eyes were opened and they recognized Jesus, who immediately vanished from their sight. They said to one another, "Were not our hearts burning within us as we talked on the road and he explained the Scriptures to us?" They got up immediately and returned to Jerusalem, where they found the 11 and the rest of the company assembled. They were greeted with, "Christ is risen. It is true. Jesus has appeared to Simon." Then the travelers recounted what had happened on the road and how they had come to know him in the breaking of the bread. My friends, the gospel of the Lord. So first, please allow me to wish each and every one of you and your families and your friends a very happy and very blessed Easter morn. It's an honor, really, to be here to celebrate this feast with you. And I want to say thank you for your witness of your faith to the world. Because it takes a witness to be up this early. And to even choose to attend liturgy. I mean, that really is a witness. My friends, this gospel story, the road to Emmaus, it's not just a story about 2 disciples who were perplexed or disappointed or confused or struggling with what faith means in their life and how it works. This story, really, the road to Emmaus, I believe, is our story as well. Many of us begin our life early and early learning about God and who God is and how God works in our lives. And we learn things like the 10 Commandments, and we learn all kinds of facts and figures in history and who the Pope is and when he was and all that junk, right? We learn all about the 7 sacraments. We learn just tons of stuff. If you happen to be around my age, you were probably hammered with the Baltimore Catechism so that you would learn where faith and life were contained in black and white answers in 1,400 questions and answers. And it was black and white. It was simple, sweet, and all you had to do to get to salvation was get those 1,400 answers correct, right? You got it made. And we also, if maybe you were raised a little bit later, you might have learned about a God of love and mercy and compassion with just a little dose of law and commandments and a few of the sacraments and sacramentals and a smidget of sin, because we got to keep that alive. And then we learned about various graces, and various levels of sin and which ones were really bad and which ones weren't so bad. How much grace you could get for doing this or that, right? But lots of different options and lots of different ways to look at how God was in our lives. But then what happens to each and every one of us is we encounter life. And then all of a sudden, what we see is that there's a whole heck of a lot more gray than there is black and white, right? A lot more gray. And all of a sudden, we come face to face with the spiritual life, and it says, wow, there's a lot more conflict. There's a lot more mystery that's here than these 1,400 questions, right? A lot more mystery confronts our beliefs, and then it causes us to have to reposit our position, or it shatters, if you will, our paradigm, because we approach it with the reality that we got the answer, and all we got to do is live it. We just got to follow those things, do those things. And then you and I, just like the disciples on the road, we're left questioning and perplexed and disappointed and confused and struggling, just as they were. But I don't believe that that's our greatest challenge. I believe what is our greatest challenge is that we, like the disciples, are continually trying to find these encounters with God, these things that happen when God appears and then disappears in our lives. I call them Emmaus moments. And I believe that they happen all the time, just like they happened to the disciples on the road. But you and I often fail to recognize the God who dwells with us all the time. I bet if you just stop and think, if you could just stop and think for 20 seconds or 30 seconds or even 10, I bet you could identify several of those Emmaus moments in your lives. Like, have you ever sat with somebody who was struggling with a relationship, either beginning or ending, and just cried with them? Or have you ever sat down or just been down in the dumps and find yourself struggling to find hope and meaning, and then all of a sudden the phone rings, or a text message comes through, or a card arrives in the mail, and then the sun begins to break and the clouds seem to begin to part? Or have you ever had the opportunity to celebrate some really fantastic joy with somebody close to you and felt the flood of emotions and happiness? Those, my friends, are Emmaus moments. And I believe that they happen for you and I all the time in our lives. But the fact is we just don't recognize them until we have to walk away from them. And then all of a sudden we come back and we see, there was God. Remember that? Or we start to tell the story again with one another or to one another, right? Because all of a sudden in that, God was realized. I hate doing that in the middle of a homily, but I have to. You see, my friends, I believe that we have a God of relentless grace, a God who just wants to find us and only share God's love with us in amazing ways and numerous times. And a God who's always searching for incarnational moments when that God's self-revelation can happen. And our biggest challenge is to stop pretending that we're in control of everything long enough to recognize that those moments happen, and they happen all the time. Many of you know I work at a maximum security prison, and many of you might know already the story of Tony. Tony's a multiple murderer, right? And the dudes from Sicily took out a lot of people. I managed to organize a concert for our offenders at the prison, and in that organization, we put on a concert, and the guys sang for the other guys, and that's pretty risky business in prison, but they did a wonderful job, and I happened to be, there was a chair open next to Tony. I sat down next to Tony, and Tony's 85, 87, something like that. And remember, he's from Sicily, and I have a cold, so I won't do this really well. But I sat down next to Tony at the concert, and he says, Father, he says, thanks for doing this for us. So that's a nice thing. And now
Tony took out a lot of people, lots of people, and you never believe an offender, okay? You just don't, because they'll tell you just about anything. But I looked in his eyes, and it was true. He was grateful. He was grateful that somebody chose to do something for him. And all it was 11 songs. It wasn't like we, rocked the house. It wasn't like it was Kiss or anything. But for one moment, I believe it was an Emmaus moment, one of those times where God says, "Hi." Forgot to say, as he ended, he said it, "Grazie," thank you. Those Emmaus moments happen in our lives, and they usually happen in flashes, and they usually disappear, and they are left you and I, or they leave you and I wondering what that was about, because the encounter happens so fast and so quickly, and then disappears so as quickly as it happened, that you and I are left wondering, what was that, right? What was that encounter about? And I believe those Emmaus moments happen for us all the time. My hope, my real hope, and my real prayer for you as we step into this Easter season, and in fact, the one thing that I believe we can walk away from this liturgy with today is the challenge to stop long enough in our lives, to stop long enough to recognize those Emmaus moments, those moments when God flashes God's self before our eyes and leaves us wondering how we might be in relationship with each other and with our God. So I hope this Easter season and the seasons that follow are filled with